we're going to get started. Thanks for everybody for coming. We have David Fisher on the line. He is the founder and CEO of Integra Ledger, which is a blockchain company. David is also the founder of the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium, which OU Law just joined. A protracted round of negotiations with our own purchasing department. But yes, we were able to join the GLBC or sign their memorandum of understanding. They have over 130 institutions worldwide that have now joined. And the purpose of the GLBC, which we are now members, or intend to be members, I get them to explain how the MOU really works, is to basically create a framework for blockchain and legal to come up with ideas and the best case strategies moving forward for that. So we are proud to be part of that. This group right here, there's a few of you I see that I know have been really interested in blockchain, and hopefully that will help you and our school move the entire conversation forward around the nation and around the state. So we are blessed to have David here. He is a thinker in how blockchain can be used in legal, and that's beyond just cryptocurrency. Right, Frank? Right. Okay. So without further ado, I will let David take it and hear us. So if you do have questions, please, raise your hand and we'll get to a stopping point, and then he can answer some questions. But yeah, and we have some other attendees across the nation watching it as well. So if you bring your questions, choose our words wisely. So thanks, and David, take it away.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. You guys here in the back? Good? Yep. Great.
Good. Okay, thanks very much for having me. I'm sitting in a little cubicle here at the Denver airport. About ready to fly to New York, where I'm speaking at the World Blockchain Forum. So I have a few minutes, and so I'm very happy to walk you through our outlook on the use of blockchain technology in the legal industry. What I'd like to do is just run through a PowerPoint presentation, which I think gives a pretty good overview of the GLBC and blockchain in the business of law. So let me see if I can share my screen. And okay, can everyone see that PowerPoint slide?
Great.
Great. Okay. So really, all this started with Bitcoin, the Bitcoin blockchain. That's arguably not the origin of blockchain and some of the theories of distributed ledgers. But certainly in terms of the popular consciousness, it started with Bitcoin, which just turned 10 years old. For those of you that don't know the background, Bitcoin started with a white paper written by Satoshi Nakamoto. No one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. If it's a man, a woman, a group of people, the U.S. government, no one really knows. But the amazing thing about Bitcoin and to some degree blockchain in general is that it starts with an idea, right? It starts with a white paper, and what the Bitcoin white paper presented was this idea of truly peer-to-peer electronic transactions with no financial institution as an intermediary. And there's cryptography, and there's a whole lot else that goes into it. But the idea was to put the trust in the network rather than any one central institution or central intermediary. In other words, if you can't trust one, maybe you can trust everybody. So it's really a radical transformation in how we organize society, if you think about it. I mean, we since the dawn of modern civilization, that's really a story of centralization. So central authority, central government, that's now potentially been turned on its head by this notion of distributed trust, as popularized by Bitcoin and Bitcoin blockchain. So I did this PowerPoint a couple weeks ago, so I'm not sure what the price of Bitcoin is currently, but over $100 billion in market cap approximately. there have been thousands of other blockchains and cryptocurrencies launched, ranging to, on any given day, there are probably 15 to 20 that have a total market capitalization or float of over $1 billion. I mean, it's just amazing to think about. I mean, if it starts with a white paper, typically, and somehow you end up, with a network value, measured in 10 figures. And that's remarkable, right? Bitcoin started with a white paper, and now it preserves over $100 billion in value. That's pretty radical, and that shows the power, I think, of distributed digital trust. So the way we think about blockchain, in law, is if you can preserve value, cryptocurrency on a blockchain, and you can memorialize the authenticity and integrity of that data. I mean, think about law. Law is it's interactions between typically untrusted parties, right? It's a negotiation between companies. It could be a lawsuit. It could be any number of things, but it's always among third parties. And our insight was potentially using blockchain technology to foster trust and data interchange between those parties in law. Today you have trusted intermediaries. Law firms are certainly trusted intermediaries. They have document stores, but the way those relate, just think about how two law firms would relate to each other. They don't connect their data. They don't share their data. In most cases, they're just emailing it, right? Which we know is not terribly secure, and it's certainly not efficient. And so our vision was to apply blockchain technology to really transform the way actors in the legal industry interact with each other. So I want to make a point here that we're in the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium, we're focused on the business of law. That's our real point of uniqueness. We're not focused on the practice of law so much. So the typical blockchain attorney, for example, is very interested in how to advise clients in blockchain projects or blockchain utilization of blockchain technology. Say if it's an insurance company or a bank, that sort of thing. That's not our core focus. Our core focus is, within the hedges, within the legal industry itself, how does blockchain potentially make the ecosystem of law more trusted and more efficient? The sort of interesting thing, if you think about it, it's like everything in the world, absolutely everything in the world has a legal context, right? So someone owns it, or there's a transaction, which is an agreement to move value, just notions of just general laws and citizenship and so on and so forth. Absolutely everything has the legal context. But, that's currently orchestrated really by social trust or social consensus, right? So when you do a contract currently between two parties, you agree to something, and then there are a whole bunch of reps and warranties in that contract. Basically, we promise that this is true. We promise that we're telling the truth. We promise that we own this asset. And in the event that it's discovered later that something is not what we asserted it would be or claimed it would be, then there's some sort of consequence. So that's a social construct. So virtually every contract has those types of provisions, which it's social trust. And if you don't trust the other person, then you're not going to trust those reps and warranties. What blockchain presents potentially is a way to actually add intrinsic trust. To let's say you're asserting in a transaction that you made X number of dollars last year and Y number of dollars the year before that. I suppose you could present some bank statements. You could present other documentary information to sort of back that up. But what if you could use blockchain technology to basically assure with near perfect certainty that certain things exist or certain things happened? And so that's what we mean by digital trust in the context of the current world, which is mostly social trust. So how does this relate to productivity? If you think about this notion, everything has a legal context, right? Everything that's owned or moves, that's a lot of social trust, right? And it works, right? Because for the most part, people do trust each other, and they know each other, and you know who you're dealing with, and that's fine. But when you start adding this up over just 8 billion people, or how many people are on Earth, and tens of millions or hundreds of millions of other companies and entities, that's a lot of complexity. That's a very complex web of social trust. And our vision was to, again, add some digital trust to that, to start to just add incremental efficiency to just a staggering number of human interactions, in a legal context. I don't need to tell you that the world is a pretty chaotic place from a data standpoint. I mean, again, for law, email is the primary interface that people use, and you literally push send, and that email goes out into the world. It bounces off different servers. You don't really know where it is. It's chaotic, and if that's the interface layer for most of law, first of all, it's not efficient. It's not secure. And as we've seen in recent years, if it's not secure and you don't control it, and it's not encrypted in most cases, you can have a catastrophic loss of trust. Right? I mean, look at what happens with Facebook, and fake accounts, and bots and so on and so forth. I mean, trust, arguably digital trust, to the extent there has been the theory of digital trust, and I would say it's not actually digital trust. We're trusting in a Facebook. We're trusting in Equifax. We're trusting in these central intermediaries, to take care of our data. We're trusting the intermediary. There is no actual fabric of digital trust there, and as we've seen over the past few years, that's led to a real crisis, in trust, in the world in general. We think that I would certainly not assert that the GLBC is going to bring trust to the world, but we can bring more trust to data and the legal ecosystem of the world. This is just some stats on the magnitude of the problem. I would argue it's actually bigger than this, but you can see from the right-hand side there, CIOs, and if you talk to CIOs of big law firms, they'll tell you to a one that every day they're fighting off threats and attacks to their systems. This is just what I said in terms of using blockchain technology to bring integrity, and trust to legal data. So what does this mean actually? So the way this is actually implemented is, and I'll relate this back to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. To have a Bitcoin is essentially just to have a number. Now that number, is memorialized on the blockchain distributed ledger, and operations can be performed in terms of who that's assigned to, who owns the Bitcoin, for example. But if you think about law, the currency of law, in a certain sense, is documents. And so the approach that we've taken here is to add blockchain-based identities to legal data. These are unique identities that could be added to a contract or a clause or other data artifact, and that ID, that unique ID, is then recorded on blockchain, this immutable time-stamped ledger. So we move from that chaotic cloud of activity to a vision where if everything has a unique ID, that's not, so it's, as in the current world, if you have a document sitting in a law firm, that law firm has its own information systems, its own databases, its own identifiers, but those are known only to that institution, and in many cases only that software. But with blockchain, we're actually adding this universal identifier system. So no matter what database you're using at a given law firm or a company or government, there's this third-party permanent identifier for data. So what that means is if you move a document from one institution to another, the ID stays the same. That's very significant because now we've created this anchor point that says that data sitting at company A, is actually the same data that's sitting at company B, and we're accomplishing that without actually having to send the data itself. So you don't have to email the document and do document compare. You can have the same, two counterpart copies of a contract. You can confirm that both parties are looking at the same contract, because we're using these third-party identifiers that are immutably recorded on blockchain. So this is probably not the most elegant way to describe it, but if you talk to big law CIOs, in many cases they're most focused on their on-premise data because they control it. It's their servers. That's not very efficient, and so most of the world is moving to cloud-based solutions, which poses lots of problems from the standpoint of intermediaries. So you take a law firm's data, you put it in the Google Cloud. There's this question of whether or not the law firm still owns it, or if Google owns it, or who owns those servers, and so on and so forth. So really, we think of blockchain as maintaining trust in your own data as if it's on your own premises, combined with the efficiency of the interconnectivity and relationships you would get from a cloud-based service. And we think of that as sort of a hybrid blockchain to the layperson. The way blockchain is implemented, because no one company, no one institution can own a blockchain or control blockchain. It would just be a database with all the problems of centralization and central authority. And so to implement blockchain, other than the public blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, industry has gotten together, various industries have gotten together to form their own industry groups to stand up blockchain networks, to standardize technology, that sort of thing. So you've got the insurance industry, you've got R3 on Wall Street, and so on and so forth. The GLBC is the legal industry answer to that. And so when we were starting this a couple of years ago, we got feedback from many law firms, particularly in New York, expressing concern that just as blockchain technology was poised to make many other industries more efficient, more trusted, the legal industry was presented with the possibility that blockchain could make the legal industry worse. And the reason for that is law firms are intermediaries, and lawyers don't tell their clients what technology to use. So if Goldman Sachs wants a given law firm to use Goldman-specific technology to support transactions, then that law firm is probably going to have to do that. So the lawyers that we talked to in New York in particular were concerned that to support their wide array of clients, they could find themselves implementing a plethora of different blockchain platforms, actually creating more chaos and more expense in the practice of law, even as blockchain was transforming other industries. So the answer to that ultimately was the formation of the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium to gather the world's legal industry to create standards in the legal industry to actually push those out to in-house counsel, to governments, to other institutions. So get the standards set for the legal industry itself, and then push those out to everyone else, rather than the opposite, which would be the insurance industry, the banking industry, and the shipping industry, and so on and so forth, each imposing their own standards, and the legal industry itself facing a wild, chaotic environment of 15 different blockchains, great expense, just the opposite of what blockchain should do. So that's really the origin and the vision for the GLBC in the context of the world of blockchain. So in one sentence, what we're trying to do is build this new data integrity utility for the legal industry. So, and it has many applications: data security, privacy, productivity. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We're currently at 145 members. That gives you a sense of the growth. So it's just in the time that we've been planning this webinar, we've gone from, I guess, the 130 2 or 3 weeks ago to 145 institutions from all over the world. A lot of law firms, but certainly some enormous companies, IBM, American Express, AIG, that sort of thing. Major information companies in law, such as Thomson Reuters, Wolters Kluwer. On the upper left-hand side under Integra, you can see the Association of Legal Administrators, 9,000 members there. So we really are successfully gathering the legal industry around this vision, which is very exciting. We launched it 14 months ago, and we weren't quite sure how or what kind of traction we would get at this point. This is fast becoming the home for blockchain in the business of law in the world. This just gives you a sense of the global coverage. I stated we're in 25 countries, but if you include branch offices of law firms in particular, we're probably in 50 or 75 countries. So when we say business of law as opposed to practice of law, I want to walk you through what that actually looks like. A lot of what you read about in blockchain is the creation of new, literally new applications. So they're distributed apps on Ethereum in particular, which are just brand new software, built with a blockchain backend. That's not how we're working to implement blockchain in the business of law. The fact of the matter is that the legal industry is very conservative, moves very thoughtfully, I won't say slowly, but thoughtfully, in the way it applies technology, and with good reason. I mean, I'm a longtime CEO and company founder, and if you're doing a transaction, a venture capital transaction or a financing transaction, you don't necessarily want to be experimenting and innovating. When you do that, I mean, you want tried and true, what works, what are best practices. So the legal industry in general is conservative for good reason. That extends to the use of technology and the deployment of technology, leading to a frequent critique that the legal industry is technologically backwards or slow. But I think it's rightfully conservative. And so embracing that rather than fighting that, the approach we've taken is to build blockchain data integrity into the existing legal industry stack, if you will. And so I'll give you some examples of that. What we're doing is we're building blockchain features into the software that the legal industry already uses. So an example of this, and actually I was just at the NetDocuments conference in Utah yesterday. NetDocuments is the #2 document management platform in law, with about 10 billion, up to 10 billion documents in their repository. I think they serve about 30% of the AmLaw 200. And what NetDocuments demonstrated yesterday was they built blockchain into their platform so that every document can be authenticated by a third-party blockchain, not by trusting NetDocuments. Let me dwell on this for a second. This is significant because NetDocuments is a cloud-based document service. And cloud-based anything has scared the daylights out of the legal industry in general. Because you're moving your critical data, your client privileged data to a cloud provider. And NetDocuments is an incredible company. They truly have best of breed software for what they do. Nevertheless, you're trusting a third party to host that data. The reason they've implemented blockchain on their platform is now, to augment whatever trust you have in NetDocuments, you have third-party blockchain proof that the document sitting in the NetDocuments repository is the original, right? So you don't have to trust them. There's now a third-party proof. There's an ID and there's a hash, and so they're implementing that throughout their platform. So that's going back to that slide where I showed premises plus cloud equals blockchain. And you can see how adding blockchain to cloud-based services makes it more palatable and more trusted for the very conservative legal industry. Thomson Reuters, Contract Express, one of the leading contract automation platforms in the world. A little bit different. So if NetDocuments was a cloud-based document repository document management system, here we have a contract template software platform. In this case, we're creating contracts and adding blockchain IDs to those contracts. So now you have specifically a contract system where you have counterparties and you want to be able to confirm that both parties have the authentic original document. And so Contract Express, Thomson Reuters, building blockchain identities into contracts to be able to do that. You might ask, well, why is that all that significant? It becomes very significant because at the day you sign the contract, there's no worry about whether or not it's the authentic contract. But what happens when a company is merged? What happens when a lawyer switches law firms? What happens 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? Imagine estate planning documents, and controversy sometimes arise over the existence of a will, or what version of a will. I mean, there's so many instances where having a third-party blockchain-based proof of existence, proof of authenticity, really matters. Maybe not in the current moment, but certainly years hence. ServeManager, another interesting use case. So ServeManager is I think their largest technology platform supporting process servers around the country. There's depending on jurisdiction, different rules on service to process. There's always a question of successfully serving someone with papers for court appearance or lawsuit, that sort of thing. What ServeManager is doing, and they've already integrated this, is added blockchain proof for when there's a service attempt, when it's been successful, doing things like recording on blockchain the coordinates from a GPS standpoint. So you can imagine a process server out serving documents on someone, and from his or her phone, just clicking successfully served, and recording on blockchain third-party proof of time of the process or the service attempt, and the geolocation. And so if there's ever any question about whether or not process was served correctly, you've got that third-party record that doesn't necessarily solve for someone that wants to commit fraud in that process, but to the extent that just through errors, data corruption, just mistakes potentially by the process server. These are not the most highly paid people, and there are a lot of these things, a lot of attempts. This is just a way to create that trusted third-party record. So this is an example, a very different example of how blockchain in one component of the legal industry adds value, adds efficiency. And then just to touch on this, Box.com has been integrated. Microsoft, it can be built into really any software. And the point is adding this universal data integrity layer to all of the software that lawyers already use. All right, so to touch on where this might be going, I've already mentioned NetDocuments and document management systems, the contracts and Contracts Express, but anything where there's data that's shared through the legal industry, between clients, between law firms, between governments and regulatory bodies, anything where there's data that has to be exchanged, where adding trust to that data is helpful, is going to be impacted. So billing systems, calendaring systems, discovery, AI, email security. So let me go back to this. One of the most significant uses of blockchain, we think, in the legal industry will be to support AI. probably the hottest technology in law right now is machine learning, AI, various tools to help lawyers process the huge amounts of data, in documents. I mean, you can imagine, especially in a corporate context where you could have a transaction with hundreds of thousands of documents, or large complex lawsuits, same sort of thing. There's no reasonable way to perform that work, with just human beings. And so certainly there's been software to automate the way documents are analyzed, and that's getting more advanced almost by the day. And broadly, we refer to this as artificial intelligence or AI. The problem with that, as machines get more capable, as AI gets more sophisticated, is you don't really know what's going on, with the artificial intelligence. And actually, the GDPR law over in Europe references this. The requirement, at some point going forward, to have what's known as explainable AI, which is a bit of an oxymoron, but we think blockchain is a significant enabler of AI and may actually be a killer app within the legal industry. And I'll give you an example just to show you what I mean. A couple of months ago, a fatal car accident outside of San Francisco with a Tesla that hit a concrete barrier, I think, and killed the driver. Subsequently, there's been a dispute as to whether or not it was driver error or the Tesla on autopilot, right? And this really, I think, gives a great example of some of the challenges we face, especially in law going forward. Now, imagine litigating that claim, right? So the Tesla hits the barrier, driver's killed, so the driver's not around to testify. How do you even begin to think about this? So Tesla claims it was driver error. The driver claims no, or the family of the driver says no, it was a flaw in the software. Well, with adaptive algorithms, and AI controlling autonomous vehicles, what was the condition of that algorithm? What was the state of the AI at the time of the crash? Right? I mean, was there a flaw in the algorithm? Was there a flaw in the way it was trained? I mean, how do you even know? I mean, can you imagine that lawsuit? I mean, what do you do? Do you depose the software developers at Tesla to try to determine there was some flaw in the algorithm? It's basically impossible. This is significant because, and that's why blockchain is so important in a legal industry context, because the lawyers of the world are going to be very much involved in sorting out questions like this. In the case of that Tesla, wouldn't it be helpful if the data that was governing that car at that time were hashed and written to a trusted third-party blockchain? Right, so now you can refer to that, and you can potentially hash the state of the algorithm. You could hash the original training data. So now you actually have a trusted record. It doesn't maybe answer all the questions, but answers probably many of them. As you think about AI in the legal industry, as it gets more and more sophisticated at helping to guide attorneys, making decisions on transactions and lawsuits and so on and so forth, you kind of need to know what's going on underneath the hood, not on a moment-by-moment basis. But we're already working on this to add blockchain technology into some of the legal AI platforms. So if there's ever a question about how or why a conclusion was reached, there's actually an audit trail for that. Again, that can only be accomplished by a third-party trusted mechanism like blockchain. So this slide just shows all the huge integrations that are on the way, really being built into all software that attorneys might use. Just to quickly touch on what the consortium is. It's a non-stock, nonprofit corporation Delaware-based. It was formed a little over a year ago. There are 9 directors, 3 countries represented on the board, big law firms, tech consultancies. Significantly, there's a technical advisory board. This is probably the most significant function of the GLBC. If we're trying to build blockchain technology into the legal industry technology stack, and we're trying to standardize that in some way, we actually have to specify what that standard is. The legal industry itself needs to reach consensus and agreement on what that standard should be. And again, the GLBC is that umbrella organization for that. And then finally, there's a policy committee, which isn't active yet, but I think it's going to become very significant, especially in questions like the approach, for example, to AI, to who makes these decisions, what needs to be reported, that sort of thing. We designed the GLBC in a very unique way among the consortia in the world, the blockchain consortia in the world. So rather than, and let me step back for a second. So I'm not a lawyer. I've employed many law firms and made lawyers in my life doing transactions for various companies I've run. But I don't consider myself part of the legal industry historically. What I discovered, when I started this about 3 years ago, is that most of the legal industry organizations are exclusive. Right? To be a member of the ABA, you need to be a lawyer. To be a member of the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, you have to be working in-house at a company. So for all these different organizations throughout law, they're exclusionary. And that's a problem for a technology that is really intended to underpin everything. And so based on my experience with that sort of exclusive kind of club-like approach to the industry, we resolved that the GLBC had to include everybody, all stakeholders. So it's companies, it's law firms, it's law schools, go to you. We wanted everyone around the table. I mean, if these are standards that are going to underpin digital trust in law, then we need everybody. So that was one big choice. We also wanted to make sure there was no barrier to joining. And with most organizations, there's a membership fee. The organization then sort of takes on a life of its own, almost like a business where it has staff and expenses, and becomes its own little universe. We wanted to avoid that. We did not want a $10,000 or even a $1,000 membership fee to dissuade stakeholders from being a part of this. And so we kept the cost at zero. That would probably change at some point. But the point is, we wanted maximum inclusivity. And for a technology that hopefully eventually binds the entire globe together, for that legal context, we want to make sure we could include everybody. The one thing that we do require is that sponsoring, or that member organizations sponsor or support a project. I mean, this is not a marketing consortium. This is for the development of a really important technology that could really transform the way the entire legal industry interacts with itself. So to get there, especially for this kind of bleeding edge technology, we need people experimenting. We need people working on this. And so again, very distinctly different from the other blockchain consortia in other industries. In this case, instead of doing membership fees, instead of creating an exclusive club, we basically said, this is open to any organization that will actively support the development of the technology. Again, we think that's unique, not just in the blockchain consortia of the world, but also in the legal industry itself. I mean, this is a consortium of organizations that are committed to jointly developing technology. We think it's truly one of a kind in that sense. Let's touch on kind of the broad areas of focus: data integrity, data privacy, interoperability, productivity, and then evolution of technology. Again, this points up the fact that this is very much business of law, not practice of law. Like you don't see reference to law anywhere really. I mean, the reference is to data, right? Interoperability, privacy, integrity. And this reiterates what I had mentioned before. So it's open source, no vendor lock-in, multiple blockchains, collaborative. This is truly a developmental organization. And some of this may impact you guys in terms of being involved, in terms of potentially contributing to the development of materials and educational materials. We're working on Blockchain 101 course, so to speak. We're starting to spin up more and more webinars, this being one of them. We're beyond just standard setting, and collaborative development. There certainly is an educational mission to the GLBC. We want more more stakeholders in the legal industry to understand what blockchain is beyond the confusing concepts of cryptocurrency and the very, very poorly named smart contracts. So I think that's the first time I've used the term smart contract in this talk. We can get into that more in that Q&A later. Just to touch on some of the issues that we have ahead of us. Governance. We're obviously tackling that within the legal industry, within the GLBC. But that's always a question, right? So at one extreme, you have the public blockchains, which are it's the Bitcoins and Ethereums of the world, where there is no central authority permissioning those. Anyone can join them. Anyone can use them. The GLBC is not taking that approach. This is certainly governed by the industry, so it's not a purist blockchain in the sense of the public blockchains. And one thing that's already been seen is laws that are starting to be put in place in various jurisdictions, and that's even within the United States, different states, in terms of securities laws and blockchain or blockchain-based evidence, but then country to country as well. So that's a complicating factor, and we think, again, by bringing the legal industry together, that's a better forum for advising governments potentially, and various regulatory bodies on how law is written, how it's implemented. There's the technology itself, which is still developmental, and there are issues with speed and security and cost and so on and so forth. There's the ever-present standards issue, which is a bit like the Betamax and VHS standards competition. It's probably before the time of most people in the audience there, but there was a time when there was a competitor to actually people that probably don't even know what Betamax and VHS are, let alone the difference in standards in the streaming world today. There's cryptocurrency hype, which confuses people. There's the blockchain hype cycle, and then there's just the idea that maybe there are many problems that could be solved through collaboration, where collaboration's the important part and not necessarily the technology or blockchain. Some consequences we think in years to come, and this is probably relevant to everyone in the audience there. Blockchain, just based on what I showed you in some of the current implementations, is going to put downward pressure on the cost of legal service delivery. Now, often in law, that is interpreted to mean a reduction in revenue, reduction in compensation potentially for attorneys. I don't think that's probably the case. When you look at most industries, innovation leads to increase in value, increase in revenue. It's our contention that the friction and inefficiency in law has prevented that type of innovation cycle and market growth. And I've referenced this in the other bullet points. With less friction, less value going to the friction, more value can go to the client. That leads to greater return on investment for the client. It leads to typically more demand for law. And so we think that the ultimate consequence of the broad implementation of blockchain in the legal market is going to be to lower the cost of service delivery, increase the value, and consequently actually directly stimulate the size of the legal market. I think most people know that there's a huge amount of latent demand for law that's unmet just due to cost and inefficiency, and to the extent that we can start to access more of that demand through more efficient service delivery, that should lead to a growth in the market, which is not something you hear very often. And when people talk about the legal market, which is typically referred to as fairly stagnant from the standpoint of overall revenue. So we're very optimistic that blockchain is not going to reduce what lawyers make or law firms earn. We think it's actually going to increase it. So a couple final points. We maybe take a couple questions. Blockchain is effectively a distributed database technology. I think at some point it'll just be assumed to be built into things as a trust layer. So I think we're going to stop talking about blockchain. We'll have to rename the consortium at that point. What you're going to see starting next year will be prominent applications starting to deploy this. And whether or not they advertise that is beside the point. It'll be part of the platform. So NetDocuments for sure, Thomson Reuters, Wolters Kluwer, others. Going out one more year, we think that virtually all applications in law will integrate some blockchain technology. And then going out 1 year further still, then as the technology is more mature as it's broadly built into everything, I think you'll start to see a new generation of applications that really will have new functionality, not just increased trust. If you want to learn more, go to legalconsortium.org, and we'd love to get everyone as actively engaged as possible. And we think there are lots of opportunities for that over the next couple of years.
Great. Thank you, David. Any questions before we wrap up? Brandon.
Hi, David. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to ask, what can law students do to get involved or at least learn more about blockchain law to add value to interviews and going out to seek jobs with these larger firms who will be using these applications soon?
So law students seeking jobs with law firms or companies or
any of the above.
Yeah.
Just what do they need to know to be able to turn that into value in those interviews?
Yeah, I'm not sure. So the way we're approaching blockchain in the business of law, I'm not sure that's deeply relevant to lawyers, right? We think for what we're doing, if we're building blockchain into NetDocuments, for example, that's going to make lawyers more productive, right? And the way that's going to be implemented is going to be seamless, so you don't even need to know that it's blockchain, right? It could be referred to as get an Integra ID, for a document. So I think my best advice would be, number one, start reading CoinDesk, CoinDesk.com, which is a little bit like the Bloomberg of blockchain, just to get conversant in the market. I think that's important because for the soon-to-be practicing attorneys there, blockchain in the business of law, will be an enabler for you. But what will be most significant is if you understand how blockchain is going to be implemented client side. Now, again, this sounds like it's outside the mandate of the GLBC, and that's broadly true. But yes, for my advice on how new lawyers can sort of add this to their repertoire, say, read CoinDesk.com, read the articles, see what's being introduced, see what companies are doing. Position yourself to understand what the technology does, because as that new generation of application emerges, it's going to lead to new business models. examples would be changes in the way class actions come together or mass torts. I mean, blockchain is probably going to transform the way that happens and the way tens of thousands of parties interact with a law firm, for example. So I'd say get as well-grounded as you can in the technology and what's happening across the ecosystem. That's by far and away the best thing you can do. The second thing I would suggest would be that to the extent that projects emerge, especially out of the consortium, and that can be with software companies, it could be with law firms, like find a way to get involved. And that could be just volunteering to participate. It could be as an intern. I suppose you could even propose a project. I can imagine a circumstance that a group of students there has an idea about how blockchain could impact patent and trademark law practices, and maybe reach out to a local law firm, a large law firm that has resources, and propose, to work together to apply the technologies, which is quite simple, but in that practice area, that practice group. And so I think that's an exciting way to move with this. I also happen to be the founder of the Global Legal Hackathon. And so that we're about to announce it actually in the next few days for 2019. I would say one way would be to form a team for the Global Legal Hackathon, which will be in February, and work on a blockchain project. So those are three ideas.
Thank you. Great. We got time for a real quick question.
Hi, David. Back to how blockchain's supporting machine learning. Are you thinking that each decision by the AI is recorded on blockchain to audit the AI, or how do you see that practically being done?
Yeah, there's no wonderful way to do it. I mean, for example, let's take the Tesla story. I mean, the amounts of data created by AI are just staggering, right? There's no way to hash it every millionth of a second. So our thought process around this is again, looking for auditability, the training data, right? So if you're training an algorithm, and the effectiveness of that algorithm to some degree is highly dependent on how it's trained. And so having a record of the data that was originally used to train it, is significant. So we see a circumstance where you would hash and record the training data. And if there's successive training data, then you would potentially record that as well. As for the outcomes, I mean, that's not as interesting as the state of the algorithm. So we can imagine a circumstance where you actually record a snapshot of certain key components of the algorithm or the system as a way to preserve the state of that system. This is bleeding edge stuff, and we're still working out the approach to it. But it's taking snapshots of data at certain points in time, and potentially algorithms or even entire systems.
Thank you very much. Great. Well, thank you so much, David. We are out of time. I'm going to let these guys get to class. Thanks, guys, for hanging out a little long.
Thank you.